Hello, good morning everyone, and welcome to this second day of the main conference. And as we did yesterday, we are starting with our keynote for today. And it is our pleasure to introduce Jef Hooyberghs from the University of UHasselt that will provide you the keynote this morning on a citizen-driven ecosystem for personal health data. Jef received a master and a PhD in science at the University of Leuven and UHasselt. And he was a postdoc studying complex systems, a scientific branch which drove him into life sciences. He joined the Flemish Institute for Technological Research, VITO, in 2003 as a data scientist, applying artificial intelligence in predictive modeling, and held the position of researcher, program manager, and researcher leader. And he's professor at the University of UHasselt since 2006, and is affiliated to the Data Science Institute of the university. So it's our pleasure to host you, and please take the stand.
Thank you for a nice introduction. Is my mic on? Can you hear me? Okay, thank you. First of all, thank you to the organizers for the opportunity to give the presentation here. It's also always a pleasure to be back in Leuven, which is my alma mater. It's a very nice city, and I just told the organizers that it's the first time that I'm in this aula, actually, which is a very nice aula. So it's thank you for the opportunity and the atmosphere here. My presentation will be about a citizen-driven ecosystem for personal health data. So it is about health. And I'll briefly introduce a little bit what VITO is. VITO is a research institute from Flanders with a very broad thematic focus. It's not only health, it's also about energy, materials, chemistry. But the focus of VITO is on sustainability. One of the topics that we perform research on, applied research, is on health. And when you're combining sustainability with health, you very easily arrive at the prevention. So there are many different ways to look at health. One of the ways we like to present it is with this health continuum, going from active health promotion over prevention up to care, if you want. For sustainability purposes, health is of course a crucial, prevention, sorry, is of course a crucial point to focus on. Now, when you want to activate prevention, there are some challenges that you meet. First of all, there is the financial challenge. A very low percentage of the money that is spent on health is used for prevention. I think it's around, in these Western countries, around 5–6%, which is not high. That's a problem. But there are, of course, other problems, and that is the problem of gathering data. Because when you want to implement health solutions, and you are in need of an evidence base, you are in need of a large amount of data. By definition, prevention is holistic from nature. I'll give you one example, which is a presentation in Cell already from 2012, which showed this holistic approach towards prevention, which is the integrative personal omics profile, IPOP. And this shows the potential of this kind of a holistic approach in the field of prevention. But the point is that when you want to use this more data-driven approach towards prevention, that you're facing a few hurdles. That you need a highly diverse set of data, you need individual data, you need longitudinal data to prove that prevention is working. And that is problematic. It's very difficult to get access to this kind of data to perform your research and to create new solutions for the health ecosystem. And that is why my presentation starts. The reason why this data is very difficult to access is because our current ecosystem, our current data ecosystem is application-centric. When you as an individual are using an application, a service, a product, this data that is needed to provide you with this service is nearly always stored very closely to the application. So when you fill in a questionnaire on COVID from a university, this data is stored on a server of the university. When you use a smartwatch to monitor your activity, this data is stored on the company that is providing this smartwatch. When you're using your lifestyle apps on a smartphone, again, this data is stored at that company. This makes sense. This is how we developed the past 10, 20 years, and this makes sense because when you want to use an application and you expect quality from this application, it makes sense to store this data close to this application. So it's natural that our ecosystem evolved in this way. But our society is also evolving. There are some socio-economic trends that are happening in our society that pose some problems currently. First of all, there is a big trend towards personalized products and services. If you're using a service nowadays, there is always a digital aspect on this service. And when you're talking about a digital aspect, nearly always there is a personalized aspect on this service. So that means that a good service needs personal data to perform its activities. So there's a big trend towards this data economy. There is another trend towards open data. If you want to use the resources of our society in an efficient way, it makes sense that when data is produced for a certain purpose, that you do not reproduce this data if you want to use it for a different purpose, so that you can reuse this data, open data, sharing data. And there is also a trend towards privacy and legislation, especially in Europe, of course, and you all know the GDPR. This legislation is meant to protect citizens, but also to engage citizens. So there are some very big socio-economic trends that are happening in our society that you cannot overlook anymore. And the point is that when you compare our product-centric data ecosystem with these trends, you run into some problems. There are some counteracting trends. For instance, how do you reconcile open data with privacy? Everybody knows that this is far from trivial. So this is posing problems. There are, of course, ethical issues associated with these kind of approaches. And there is an oligopoly. So there are currently, let's say, 5 or 6 very big international companies that more or less have control of the personal data of all of us and using it for their purposes. And that means that also innovation is hampered currently due to this situation. So this is a current situation that we're facing, and it's clearly that we are in need for a different way of dealing with data if we want to solve these kind of issues. That is a bit of a starting point. We faced these kind of questions, let's say, about 5 years ago, and we start looking around internationally, especially in Europe, about how others are dealing with this kind of problems and what kind of alternative ecosystems you can come up with. Now we very easily or very soon found that at many different countries in Europe, you're thinking about new concepts and implementing concepts on a citizen-centric ecosystem. In the citizen-centric ecosystem, the principle is quite easy. It means that every citizen gets its own data vault where he or she can store its own data. That's the central starting point. And this makes sense, of course. And that means that when data is produced, personal data, we're only talking about personal data, not about public data. When personal data is produced, that you should, or you could, get a copy, at least a copy of it, in your own data safe, in your own data vault. That means that you not only need a data storage, but you will also need a shell around this middleware to have these communication possibilities and to have these management possibilities. So if you start from this central point of view, you as a citizen will be able in the near future to manage your own personal data. And then if you decide to share this data, you can do this. You can give consent for others to use this data. And since you are the central crossroad of your data, this is a very rich set of data that can be made possible in this way. I cannot think of any other way to create this kind of rich data centralized around a single person. You are the crossroad of your own data. If this data is then shared, the quadruple helix, as we call it, can use this data. So we're talking about the academic world, civil society, the industry, public authorities. They can all, in principle, get access to this data. And then the final point in this ecosystem is that we believe, and many people believe, that we should separate services from data. So that means that in the future, we no longer find it obvious that when someone is providing you with a service, that your data is stored on the server of that company or provider or stakeholder, whatever. It makes sense that you store this data in your own data vault. And in that way, you're creating what we call a level playing field. In that way, every innovator, any service provider, product provider, has equal possibility to get access to your data. So that is the ecosystem that we envisage. One final point that I want to make here is that when you create this level playing field, you're also stimulating innovation. So when new insights, new evidence base is created, it is very easy to create products and services based on this insight, because everybody has equal rights to this data. So the innovation cycle can be speed up in this way. Stimulating innovation is one of the core reasons why VITO is investing in this kind of an approach. Of course, when you're dealing with this kind of an approach, I already mentioned this data vault in the center, this middleware around it, this light blue shell. You will also be in need of this green shell, which we call the governance of the system, because you need a contact point when you are in need of a lot of data. You cannot expect a big company to perform its research when it has to contact every individual separately. The idea here is to get an organization, a non-for-profit organization, a non-for-profit legal entity, operational, where you have this contact point if you are in need of data to perform research. That is the central theme or the central idea that we have. And within Flanders, we are creating this under the name of We Are. You are the center of your data. When we all together are prepared to share our data for certain purposes, we call it We Are. That's the idea. So in the next part of my presentation, I would like to explain a bit how we are operationalizing this, making this operational at different levels. So again, the idea is many different dimensions. You can look at it from many different ways. And I think one of the ways to present the idea is to look at it from the different geographical levels. You can look at it from an interregional level, which will be needed. It doesn't make sense to make an initiative like this only at the local level. There is the regional level, in this case Flanders, and there is the local level. This local level will be very important when we're talking about implementing things really in the field. So I will talk about these three levels in the next set of my slides. I'll start with the interregional one. I already mentioned that it doesn't make sense to create this kind of an ecosystem in a small scale. It's clearly that a viable scale should be a European scale. The legislation of Europe makes this possible. A global scale, maybe, but the European scale, I think, is the correct scale to think about with this kind of an initiative. I just want to mention that from the beginning, we were already involved in an interregional initiative. Within Europe, there is this smart specialization platform. This is a networking platform where regions can work together. By regions, I mean geographical regions at a smaller scale than a nation. Within Belgium, this is typically the scale of Flanders or Walloon. In Netherlands, it's a bit smaller, but that's what I mean by regions here. And this smart specialization platform is a European initiative where regions can subscribe to specific teams, specific specializations that they want to focus on. And Flanders very early subscribed to the team of personalized medicine. And Flanders is one of the drivers of this smart specialization platform on personalized medicine from the beginning. And we were involved in this initiative also from the beginning, presenting this concept of VR. We didn't have the concept ready at that point, but it developed within this context. I just want to mention that on top of smart specialization, there is also the Vanguard initiative, which is a bit comparable. It is initiated from Flanders, and there is a bit higher engagement involved. If regions subscribe to the Vanguard initiative, it also means some financial engagement to make things possible. And at this moment, the initiative that we are talking about is within the Vanguard initiative. You can find it there if you want. So interregional, why? I think I mentioned it, that the scale is crucial. When you really want to solve societal problems with this kind of an approach, you will need a large scale. The European scale is, I think, the scale that we should work on. Why then interregional and not directly European? There are some very good reasons to call it an interregional initiative. And I think one of the clear things is legislation. A lot of legislation within Europe is at the regional scale. So that means when you want to take initiatives, you have to take care of these regulations, and that's why an interregional approach is, in our view, the right approach. Another and probably even more important reason to work interregionally is because innovation initiatives are very often at the regional scale. And that is why we call it an interregional initiative with regional innovation nodes. At this moment, there are 3 regions in the core of this initiative from the beginning, which is Flanders, East Netherlands, and Northern Ostrobotnia, which is in Finland around Oulu region. As you probably know, Finland is one of the big initiative takers in this new approach towards data and personal data. So that is why I believe that the interregional approach is the correct approach to follow, and we are following this approach at this moment. We're also looking for specific funding within this initiative because since last year there is the I3, which is a dedicated funding for initiatives that come out of this Smart Specialization Initiative, which is a quite significant funding actually. So that is the interregional part of the story, which I think is the correct way to work for the larger aspect of the VR initiative. I will now talk about the Flanders level, and that's the main part of my presentation. Within Flanders, we started 5 years ago to build this concept. And we started by looking for a large foundation, large support for this kind of initiative. We start talking with different stakeholders. And at a certain point, about 2-3 years ago, the 5 stakeholders that you see here on the slide agreed to sustain or to support this initiative and put their shoulders underneath it. The stakeholders that you see here is VITO as a research center. There is Domus Medica. And Domus Medica is the umbrella organization of the first-line practitioners, so the medical doctors, the medical practitioners. They support the interest of the first-line practitioners, but they also support the scientific and societal aspects of the story of these people in the care sector. There is Zorgnet Curo, which was a very important organization the past 2 years during the COVID, which is the umbrella organization of the hospitals and the non-for-profit care organizations. There is Vlaams Patiëntenplatform, which is the umbrella organization of all the Flemish patient organizations that is supporting this. And there is the King Boudewijn Foundation, which is a federal organization supporting innovation with a societal point of view. So they are what they call supporting the non-organized citizen. So that means that with this partnership, we have science, we have the first, second, and third line healthcare involved, and we have the patients and the citizens involved. So this is the core team that we started this initiative with. Starting from this, we contacted the Flemish governments. I'm saying this in plural because when you want to take an initiative like this, you have to cross different policy domains. And it took us quite some time, but we succeeded to get these 3 policy domains aligned with the initiative that we want to take. And this is innovation, health, and digitization. These are 3 different policy domains within Flanders. It is not obvious Why? Because they all have their own agenda and their own way of working. When you're thinking about innovation, they are used to try new things, support initiatives that they do not know whether it will succeed or not. When you're talking about health, it's a whole different story. They are responsible for our health. They do not take risks. They have the idea to do this very well thought, very prudently, and this makes sense. So it was not easy, but we succeeded to get these three policy domains aligned, and currently we are at a position that they will be supporting this with a significant amount of money. Digitization, maybe very briefly, I'll come back to it later on. Digitization is a separate policy domain because this is also dealing about digitalization of the government itself, which is also very crucial to get attached with this initiative. So this is the starting point. We have a core partnership, and we are aligned with policy domains within Flanders, which I think is very crucial to start off with an initiative like this. Okay, then trying to explain the things that we are really doing and what this ecosystem means. I'll try to explain it by focusing on three different topics. The first topic is about a citizen-centric ecosystem. What do we understand by this? And this is about empowerment, because it's clear that when you want this initiative to be successful, you need the support of the citizens. This empowerment is very crucial. I'll be talking about separating data from applications. And this is about the digital technology that we are using to do this, and the community within Flanders that is forming around this digital technology currently. Then the third point is about applications, shaping applications, because in the end, that's what you want to do. You want to stimulate innovation for a societal purpose. So I'll try to focus on these three topics, and I hope to receive your opinion on these topics at the end of the presentation. First point, empowerment. This is, in this visual presentation, the outer shell, the green shell. So we believe that to make this story successful, you are in need of a participatory governance structure. By this we mean a non-for-profit legal entity that can support this initiative in two directions. First of all, towards the citizens, to support the citizens to achieve their interests. And this is what we believe a crucial point to create trust. Because in the beginning of my presentation, I presented a data ecosystem that was not functioning as it should. And one of the problems there is the lack of trust. People are more and more reluctant to share data because they do not trust the system anymore. So support towards the citizen is a very crucial point of what we call the governance of this initiative. Next to that, there is also the outward role that needs to be taken by this government, meaning that there should be a contact point for innovators. When you want to innovate and you are in need of data, you can contact the governance of this initiative to get access to data, provided that the participants are giving consent to share this data. So that is a crucial point that we think is important to start off. We were quite lucky to have the Koning Boudewijn Foundation involved, because when you want to start this kind of initiative, this kind of structure, you need some basic principles to start from. The Koning Boudewijn Foundation developed these principles over the past years by doing a very broad co-development exercise. So they had a large set of workshops where they invited as many stakeholders that they could think about from the quadruple helix, to think about what kind of principles should there be in place to make sure that when you're innovating, when you're creating new technology, that this technology is a caring technology, that it serves the society. That is what they call the guiding principles for a caring technology. I briefly try to explain what these principles are, and they are a bit the cornerstone that we always use when we take next steps. The idea is a bit as follows. When you want to develop a new technology in the health sector, it needs to have a human dimension. So the first point is, so the principles are numbered here. The first point is that this technology should be person-centric. It's not just about the technology, but it is about the human that is using the technology. So this person-centric aspect of the story is, of course, very crucial. That means, the second point, that you also need a very easy way of interoperability with other technologies. You cannot expect that every citizen is using a big load of technology devices. It should be integrated in a way that makes it easy to use. A third point, third principle is that we believe that you as a citizen, should be able to autonomously decide whether you want to share your information or not. So this informed consent, this informed choice is a very important one. That means that, and that's the fourth point, that we anticipate that in the near future, and I really believe that this is going to happen one way or the other, that citizens will be able to manage their own personal data. So ownership, or at least management of data. Ownership is a difficult topic to talk about. Maybe it's not the perfect phrasing here. It's more about the possibility to manage your own data and to decide what you do with your own data. Then the fifth principle is about the inclusive aspect of this story. It's easy to say we expect every citizen to deal with its own data, but when you talk with people who are experienced with it, you will find very easily that not everybody is currently able to do this. There is digital and health literacy that needs to be increased. That is this inclusive aspect of the story. Now, I'm quite positive on this aspect when you think about the past 2 years. COVID really accelerated this digital literacy in our society. It's very clear. When I look at my own parents, 2 years ago, they were not using apps on their smartphone, and they were not thinking about data, but since COVID, it completely changed. Everybody knows how to log into a government system with this ID, how to control its own vaccination data and things like that. So you can see things can change very rapidly in 2 years. So that is the fifth principle. Then the sixth is about the governance. So we think that it is important to create a community and to create a governance system around this initiative. It's what we call this participatory governance system, because we believe that it is important that citizens can participate in decisions that are made within this governance. And then the seventh point, and I'll come back to that in the next slide, is about a quality label. When applications will be developed using this data, we believe that something like a checklist should be there to make sure that you get quality labels, again, to create trust. When an application fulfills these 8 principles, they should get a quality stamp and able to make sure that people trust the application. And then the final point, the 8th one, is about evaluating and adjustment, which makes, of course, sense. You cannot expect this kind of a system to be perfect from the beginning. So that is, in a nutshell, the principles of the Koning Boudewijn Stichting, developed by the Koning Boudewijn Stichting, which we use in our setup. Now, to make these principles operational, we are involved in projects. What I've been talking about up to now are concepts, ideas, but of course you have to make this work. I'll be talking about real practical projects more in the second part of my presentation. And one of these projects is an Interreg project where we are involved in, which is called Empower Care, which is about care, so elderly care, and about empowerment. And within this project, they created a blueprint based on these caring technology principles. A blueprint like objective decision making. If you have an idea, an innovation idea, how do we check that this idea meets these principles? That's one of the goals. The other goal is good practices. Sharing information about how to deal with these kind of initiatives, how to innovate within this sector according to these principles. And then, of course, meeting and creating workshops about this aspect of the story, which was not obvious in the past 2 years for obvious reasons. So this is one of these projects that we are involved in to give this initiative some real practical experience. A final point that I want to talk about concerning this governance, I said that we are going to create a non-for-profit legal entity. You are in need of a business model. It's clearly that you need money to make this kind of initiative operational. It is non-for-profit, but nevertheless, you need a business model. You cannot use a standard business model canvas to think about such a complex system. This is about a new ecosystem that you're trying to create, so you are really in need of a different way of working. We were supported by the European government, the European Commission, to come up with the first possible ways of business models to make this initiative viable. We have now a set of possible business models that we want to explore in the next 2 years, and the idea is that within 2 years we should have the first business model operational. And of course, I have this quadruple helix here again on the side. You cannot make these kind of decisions without getting the full quadruple helix involved. Okay, now maybe a bit more on the practical side of the story, separating data from applications. This is about the digital technology that we would like to use to make this thing happen, and that we are using at the moment. This is about this central part of the picture, the data storage. When you want this new ecosystem to be operational, you are in need of some new concepts. You are in need of a way to give people the possibility to move freely between services. Nowadays, this is very difficult. When you are using Facebook, you want to use a new service, it's very difficult. You cannot change from one to the other. There is a lock-in. You want to be able to reuse your data across different applications, which is, of course, connected to the first point. You want to be able to connect with other people. You want to be able to select what you share and what you do not share. So these are the needs that we have. And it's clear that when you want to achieve this, you are in need of a completely decentralized approach. You do not want one entity to control all this data. You want to do this in a decentralized way. And of course, we all know the power of decentralization. The most well-known example is this one. In 1989, Tim Berners-Lee had an idea. He was working in CERN. He had an idea about how to deal with information in a decentralized way. This is the beginning of the internet. The funny thing is this, when he sent this to his management, this was the response he received from his manager. Exciting, but fake. I like to make the parallel with things that we are doing. Not everything is crystal clear yet, but I believe that the power of creating these kind of things is huge. When you look at the history of the internet, something very huge happened very fast. The idea was in 1989. The first web page was there in 1990. And it took off at an extreme speed because the basic principles, the basic concept was right. The idea was that anyone can use the internet. We know that at this point not everybody has access to the internet. That's another point. But the idea is everybody can use it. It is a completely decentralized architecture. Everybody can innovate, everybody can help to develop it. It's royalty-free, and there are very good standardizations. So based on these basic principles, the internet took off at an extremely high speed, and it was just within years that these things were were operational at a global level. So that is what we experienced in the 90s and in the beginning of this century. But then again, I already mentioned it in the beginning, problems arise. There are now platforms and companies that combine and bundle these web-based services. That's the oligopoly I talked about. The point is that we now have a centralized internet, while the idea was to decentralize it. So that means that we currently are in a situation where we have loss of control of your own data due to these large organizations. And of course, there is loss of innovation due to this absence of this level playing field. Not everybody has the same access or the same rights of access to data. This was realized, of course, also by Tim Berners-Lee. Probably everybody knows this story. So the inventor of the internet said, well, we should reinvent the internet. We should fix the internet. And he took this kind of initiatives where he came up with a set of basic principles to redesign the internet. And that is more or less the birth of the technology that he also is supporting, which is the solid technology. That's the one that we will be using. So solid is a technical specification developed at MIT. It's built on top of the internet, of the existing internet, and it is aimed at giving people the possibility to store their own data in a secure way and to manage their data in the way that they want to do it. So it's a decentralized way of dealing with personal data. The idea is here that everybody can store its data in a pod, a solid pod. A personal online data store. And a pod is nothing but a website where you can put your data. It's hosted by a web server. And very importantly, it is application agnostic. So you can switch between applications. That's the cornerstone of the idea. It can contain any data, but of course, we are talking here about personal data. And it is built on top of the internet, and it deals with linked data standards. That's the central idea of a pod within the solid context. Of course, it's easy to say that we want to achieve this, but there are still some technical challenges. These are 4 questions that are nearly solved or need to be solved in the near future. How do I run my pod? Is this easy as an individual? How do you keep track of your data sharing connections? Can someone else perform a query on the data in my pod? Can anybody else access this data and search within it? And can I delegate rights? These are very important questions that we need to deal with to make this We Are initiative operational. First question is maybe the most simple question. How do I run my pod? You do not run your own website. You leave this to a pod provider or to website providers. So the idea is that you can use services of other stakeholders. These can be companies or this can be a government. And that is where, and I'll come back to this point later, where I believe that Flanders made some very bold decisions and that Flanders is a perfect way to start experimenting with this because this year Minister Jan Bon initiated what he called data nutsbedrijf, so the data utility company. So this is a government initiative supporting the solid technology to host pods for companies that want to use it and for initiatives that want to use these pods. So it is government supported at this moment. The second question, how do you keep track of your sharing connections? You do this via a web agent, which is a middleware layer around your pod. Maybe a theoretical example, suppose that Facebook was built on the concept of solid. What you would do is you would tell your web agent to give Facebook access to your Facebook part of your pod, so you decide which type part of data it can access. When you create new data, you create a post, a picture, whatever. You do not put it on Facebook, but you put it in your pod. And the web agent then notifies Facebook when there are new updates. So the crucial difference with the current system is that you have your original copy of your data within your pod, and you can switch to any other applications if you want to. A very big advantage of this kind of approach is that you are the curator of your data. You can update your data, you can correct mistakes, you are in control of your data. Then the second question, can another party query my data when it is within this solid pod? Now, querying requires some assumptions. It means that you have a data model, and it means that you have a query language. That means that there should be some kind of an agreement about how data is organized and structured. That's what you could call a schema. Facebook has a schema to structure its data. Now, the problem is that when you are using a certain schema in your pod and an application is using a different schema, it does not match. So it's not that obvious how to deal with these kind of questions. Of course, when data is connected to the application, the problem is easy. Now they are separated and the problem is harder. But there are ways to deal with it, and that's through a mediator. A mediator is a software tool that translates a query from a target schema, call it Facebook, to a query on your pod, which is the source schema. So you can translate this and make these queries possible. So it is technically achievable. Another advantage is that this mediator can also serve restriction to your data. When a query is asking access to data that you are not prepared to share, this query will not be translated to a query on your pod. So currently, there is a standardization on its way to make this happen. Then the final question, which is a crucial one for our story, is can I delegate data sharing to a trusted partner? And the answer is yes, that's not difficult. A citizen can give access to an aggregator. And this aggregator can then negotiate with other partners in name of the client. Maybe for part of the data, maybe on certain conditions, but it can be done. And that means that with these technical solutions in the back of our head, it's clear that this solid technology can be used to fulfill this technological aspect of the VR initiative. Now, I mentioned that Flanders is a special environment in some sense, and the reason why is, the first thing I already explained. Digitaal Vlaanderen is supporting a data utility company, datanutsbedrijf, but the Department of Economy and Science is also supporting the Flanders Solid Lab. So there is currently also an academic support, an academic research supported and financed to make this technology happen. And that means that we are in an environment where this is extremely stimulated. On top of that, we also have companies that are specialized in supporting this kind of developments, specifically on the core of Solid. And we also have companies that are using Solid to create applications. So we have a community within Flanders that is really getting off at this moment. I'm looking at the time. Okay, still within time. That brings me to the final point, which is shaping the applications. We have empowerment, we have technology, we need applications. And that is about this arrow outside this platform. We need access to data to perform innovation, and this innovation needs to be translated into products and services that can be delivered to a citizen. For this, we currently have a tool operational. Agentschap Innoveren, so Innovation Agency, approved a project which is currently called the Save Data Project. This is a concept where innovation partners give access to their technology in collaboration with industry. So the applications come from the industry, they come up with ideas they have, and this is supported by the technology partners. In this case, the technology partners are VITO and IMEC. IMEC is also a research center within Flanders based on digital technology, and they have a lot of experience, for instance, with wearables, while VITO is bringing in the VR concept. This is in collaboration with the newly founded Spearhead Cluster on Health Tech. So the industry focusing on health tech is organized within what they call a spearpunt, a spearhead cluster. And this is also involved within this project. And the idea is that we invite companies to come up with use cases. These use cases are checked with to the principles that we developed. We try to come up with business cases. We request for extra funding or not. If the company has its own funding, we can proceed, and we implement use cases. So this vehicle is now in place. It's a project that will run for 3 years with 2 extra years possible. And there is funding for the research part and for the networking part. So we now have a vehicle to make new applications possible. Briefly, one application that we are currently working on is an application in collaboration with Janssen Pharmaceutica, which is a very large pharma company. It's part of Johnson & Johnson. And Bewell is a fastly growing Flemish company on digitalization within the health sector, on data acquisition and on dashboarding. So getting access to data from wearables and presenting this in a dashboard to users. So this Bewell company is specialized in that. And the first use case that we want to focus on is the use case on patients which have chronic lymphocytic leukemia. This is a kind of leukemia that often is developing very slowly, meaning that a lot of people who are diagnosed with it are not in treatment, but they are in what we call the watch and wait phase. And these people are really in need of telemonitoring. This came up after a survey that they felt left alone because they are in a watch and wait, they are very anxious, and nobody is monitoring them. So they are really in need of a way to be monitored, and they really want to take care of their own health and their own data. And that is the first application that we want to develop. And the needs in this use case are pretty obvious. Give patients control of their health data and be able, or give them control, give them means to monitor their own health. That means that we should link different applications together, which is what we are doing. And one of the reasons why these companies came to us is exactly because they want to make sure that they are aligned at the level of the ethical and the legal framework. They do not want to make mistakes with these kind of initiatives for obvious reasons. I'll very briefly show a few snapshots of how this is currently implemented. I had a video, but to be sure that it was working, I just took some snapshots here. The idea is that you log into your solid pod. In this case, we call it a sandbox. It is operational, but in a safe environment. It's a sandbox environment. There, the individual can monitor its weight, its heartbeat, and its oxygen level. And if something is wrong with this level, he gets a warning. And then the warning can be, or the data, can be transferred to a doctor. And you get a warning, you will still be in control of your data, but do you want to share your data with your doctor, with your practitioner? If you do this, this information is indeed transferred. The doctor has access to all the data, can really monitor the data as needed, and give feedback to the patient. So this thing is in a proof of concept operational at this moment, and we want to really implement it within Flanders in the next 2 years. So that is an example of how this thing can happen based on these solid principles. If you're interested to know more about this, next week there is an event in Flanders in Ghent, the Clean Vision Summit, where there will be a breakout session specifically on this safe data. There will be companies and research stakeholders there to think about new applications and new ways of dealing with this kind of an approach. That brings me to the final part of the presentation, which is the local aspect of the story. I talked about the European scale. We are in need of this European scale for sure. There is the Flanders region, where we are taking a lot of initiative to make the technology happen and get some applications operational. But we also have local initiatives. I told you this story has many different dimensions, and it's very difficult to start off. So you need to start off at different positions. One of the first things we started, actually, it's about 3 years ago, is what we call Bebop, which is a platform to empower citizens to deal with their own health. So it's a health promotion platform, non-clinical. We started with topics that were not raising ethical problems, so it's a non-clinical approach. It is with participation of the Domus Medica, so the clinical practitioners are involved. And the idea is that people can deal with their own health and are involved in co-development of new applications. I called it local. I mean, this is at the level of municipalities. So this is with 3 or 4 municipalities around the region of VITO. The idea is here that you capture online surveys or extra data with digital tools, and that you give advice to citizens, but evidence-based advice. And that's a very crucial one, that this is evidence-based, so there is no question about the advice that is given at this moment. It's not about new research, it's about implementing knowledge into real life. This means, for example, that you fill in a survey and you get a rough digital profile of yourself. And that is the data here in the center. It's in Dutch, sorry, but I think you more or less understand what I'm talking about. So this survey gives you a digital profile of your health status. And then you can use this data for different applications. First of all, there is a chatbot, where you can post questions. Suppose that this digital status of your health tells you that you should stop drinking, stop smoking. You can ask advice at this chatbot. A second example that was operational the past 2 years, but luckily is not needed anymore, I hope it will stay this way, is an advice on your COVID risk score. So based on this digital information that is in your pod, you can get a personalized COVID risk score and also advice about how to reduce risk, what you should do, what you should not do. A third example, that is one that we started off with, is that you can get advice at what is available in your local environment to deal with your health. If your advice is stop smoking, the question is clear, where can I get support to stop smoking? Evidence-based support to stop smoking. And often this support is available in your local environment. So this is really in the working field of healthcare. And there is a connection. The connection is made between your data and possible ways to deal with it and to create an action plan for your health in your local environment. So this thing is operational at the level of these municipalities at the moment. And it's supporting citizens. They are involved. They can give feedback and help creating new applications. They get support in their digital and health literacy. Local stakeholders are supporting these citizens. Local stakeholders are, for instance, supporting elderly people who have difficulties logging into the system, as an example. And of course, all your data is in the pot and only shared when you are prepared to share it. For the care providers, what is the advantage? This data, if you want, is connected to the electronic health record. So this digital data can be transferred to a digital health record within Flanders. Another advantage is that there is this referral possibility. Like I told you, this advice, stop smoking, where can I get professional support to stop smoking? Evidence-based professional advice. This referral possibility is present within the system. Policy. It's clear that when local governments want to support their citizens, the inhabitants, to deal with their health, this kind of data can be very crucial. They can evaluate the quality of the service that they are providing. So this is a first step to what we could call population health management at the local level. But in Flanders, the responsibilities of population health management is increasingly at the local level. So this platform is helping them. Then, of course, the final point, and that closes the circle that we showed, R&D. When more and more people are involved on this platform, when more and more data is within this platform, it clearly opens possibilities to perform research that is not possible in any other way at this moment. And here is this circle that we are currently looking at scaling up this local initiative to the Flemish level. I see that it's nearly time, and I would like to thank you all, and I'm open to questions.
Thank you very much. So time for a couple of short questions. John?
I tried to put a number of questions in the system, but maybe it's easy to take it like this. There's work on what they call the European health data space. Will that help this kind of initiative to scale across nations?
Yeah, there is this health data space, which is more aimed at data that is currently present at a government level. But there is also the European Data Governance Act. And it is the European Data Governance Act that makes this intermediates, as they call it, possible. So yes, the new direction that the European level is taking will be supportive for this kind of actions, yes.
So interest for others to, you can look at my other questions in the system.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other question?
Thank you for the presentation. And my question is about the pods. Do you have some information or insights whether we could expect some challenges on the technological level? So, for example, one has a pod of one provider and even with one schema, and the trusted partner could end up with another provider, and then they cannot exchange data easily. Do you expect that on that level there will be unification or not?
I understand your question, and the question, I think, is about how to avoid a new lock-in, how to avoid that we arrive at a new situation that is the same problems that we have now. And I agree, and there are technical solutions for sure. If you have your own pod, at least you have control of your data, and I think even if you want to transfer it to a different provider, it's easier than it is now. I think it's technically achievable, but I'm not a specialist here. But of course, we want to be sure that initiatives that are using pods are organized around the same kind of standards, and that is something that we are currently trying to work on.
Some other question?
Thank you for a very nice presentation. Thank you very much. Very clear also. I have a bit of a provocative question.
Okay.
Is citizen-centric not just state-centric? And do we really have more trust in a state than in Google?
Okay. The way I presented it is that the governance of this initiative should be a non-for-profit legal entity where citizens can participate. So it is not, the concept is not that it will be governed by the government. It will be a non-for-profit legal entity where different stakeholders can be involved, if that is answering your question.
Yeah, the government is an important stakeholder in your architecture.
Yes, but it's not a governance initiative. Maybe to make one point clear, we are currently using the pod service of the government, but that's at the technological level. The governance is something completely different, and there we want to have it citizen-centered.
Thank you so much. We have arrived to the end of the session with this last question. So thanks again, Jef, for your presentation.